They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I never understood that saying until I was 73 years old, sitting in my study on a Tuesday evening, watching everything I'd built over 40 years crumble like sand through my fingers. But let me start from the beginning, because every good story of retribution needs context, needs you to understand exactly what was taken and why what I did next was not just justified, but necessary. My name is Robert Thornfield, though everyone in the industry knew me as Old Bob. I built Thornfield Manufacturing from nothing, a small machine shop in 1981 that grew into a multi-million-dollar enterprise specializing in precision automotive parts. We supplied components to 3 of the major car manufacturers in Detroit, employed 247 people, and I knew every single one of them by name. That's the kind of business I ran. Personal. Fair. Built on handshakes and integrity. My son Michael died in a car accident when he was 32. Heart attack at the wheel, the coroner said. Left behind a wife, Sarah, and a 10-year-old boy named James. I threw myself into the business after that, working 16-hour days because the silence at home was unbearable. My wife Martha had passed 3 years before Michael, and suddenly I was alone except for the company and my Tuesday dinners with Sarah and James. That's where he came in. Marcus Webb. I met Marcus at an industry conference in Chicago in 2009. He was 35, sharp as a tack, with an MBA from Wharton and the kind of smooth confidence that made people want to follow him. He approached me at the hotel bar, said he'd been following Thornfield Manufacturing for years, called it an inspiration for what American manufacturing could be. I was flattered, I admit it. At 67, with no son to pass the business to and a grandson who was only 18, I was starting to think about legacy, about what would happen when I was gone. We talked for 3 hours that night. He knew the industry inside and out, had ideas about automation and efficiency that were forward-thinking but not reckless. When he mentioned he was looking for new opportunities, something clicked in my mind. Maybe this was the answer. Maybe Marcus could be the bridge between my generation and James's future. I hired him 6 weeks later as Director of Operations. For the first year, Marcus was everything I'd hoped for. He streamlined our production process, cutting waste by 18%. He negotiated better rates with our steel suppliers. He brought in 2 new contracts that added $700,000 to our annual revenue. The employees liked him. He was younger than me, spoke their language, understood their concerns about job security in an age of outsourcing and automation. I started grooming him to be COO. Started teaching him the parts of the business I'd kept close to my chest, the relationships with our major clients, the financial strategies, the long-term planning. I even introduced him to my lawyer and accountant. I told myself I was being smart, preparing for the inevitable, making sure the business would survive when I was gone. James was in college then, studying engineering at Michigan State. He'd come home for holidays and we'd have dinner, and I'd tell him about Marcus, about how capable he was, how he was learning the business so that one day, when James was ready, there would still be a company for him to step into. James would nod, smile, say that sounded great, but I noticed something in his eyes. A distance. A coolness when I mentioned Marcus's name. You don't like him, I said one Christmas Eve, just the 2 of us in my study, drinking the good scotch. James swirled his glass, watched the amber liquid catch the light from the fireplace. I don't know him well enough to like or dislike him, Grandpa. But nothing. If you trust him, that's what matters. I should have pressed harder. Should have asked what his instincts were telling him. James had always been perceptive, even as a boy. Instead, I clapped him on the shoulder and changed the subject to his classes, his girlfriend, his plans for spring break. The first hint that something was wrong came in March of 2012. I was going through quarterly reports with our CFO, Helen Chen, a woman I'd worked with for 15 years. She mentioned, almost as an aside, that Marcus had requested access to some of our older financial records, going back to the company's founding. Did he say why? I asked. Helen shrugged. Historical analysis, he said. Wants to understand our growth patterns, see if there are lessons we can apply going forward. It made sense. It was exactly the kind of thorough, strategic thinking I valued. But something about it nagged at me, a small itch I couldn't quite scratch. Why would he need records from 30 years ago? What growth patterns from 1981 would be relevant to a company operating in 2012? I let it go. Told myself I was being paranoid, possessive, unable to fully trust anyone with my life's work. I was 70 years old. Maybe I was just becoming one of those old men who saw threats in every shadow. Then came the incident with the Detroit contract. We'd been supplying transmission components to Great Lakes Automotive for 23 years. Jerry Mullins, their head of procurement, was someone I'd known since the 90s. We golfed together twice a year. Our relationship was solid, built on decades of reliable delivery and quality work. In June, Marcus came into my office, closed the door, and sat down with the kind of serious expression that makes your stomach drop. "Bob, we need to talk about the Great Lakes contract." "What about it?" "I've been reviewing the terms, and frankly, we're leaving money on the table. The pricing structure hasn't been updated in 4 years. Raw materials costs have gone up, labor costs have increased, but we're still charging 2008 rates." He was right, of course. I'd been meaning to renegotiate, but Jerry and I had an understanding. We didn't nickel and dime each other. When times were tough for them, I held steady on prices. When times were tough for us, they increased their order volumes. It was the old way of doing business, and it had served us well. "I'll talk to Jerry," I said. I already did. I felt my jaw tighten. "You what?" "I reached out last week, presented a new pricing proposal. 15% increase across the board, which is more than fair given market conditions." I thought I was helping, Bob. Taking initiative. "And what did Jerry say?" Marcus's expression darkened. "He wasn't receptive. Said he'd need to think about it, talk to his team. Honestly, I got the sense he felt blindsided." "Because he was blindsided, I thought. Because you went around me." I called Jerry that afternoon. He was polite but cool, said Marcus had indeed presented a new pricing structure, that it had come as a surprise after so many years of stability, that Great Lakes would need to review their options. "Bob, I've got to be honest," Jerry said, his voice dropping. "If you'd come to me, we could have worked something out. But this felt like, I don't know, like I was being played. Like suddenly we're adversaries instead of partners." I apologized, explained that Marcus was new to managing client relationships, promised we'd sit down and work out something fair. Jerry agreed, but the warmth was gone from his voice. The trust had been damaged. When I confronted Marcus, he apologized, said he'd overstepped, that he was just trying to be proactive. He seemed genuinely contrite. I accepted his apology, used it as a teaching moment about the importance of relationships in business, about how trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy. But that itch was back, stronger now. And I started watching more carefully. The thing about running a business for 40 years is that you develop instincts. You learn to read the subtle signs, a shift in someone's tone, an unusual question, a change in routine. It's like being a detective, except instead of solving crimes, you're constantly assessing risks, opportunities, and loyalties. Over the next 18 months, I started noticing things. Small things at first. Marcus staying late in the office more frequently, but when I'd drop by to chat, he'd quickly minimize whatever was on his screen. Unusual expenses showing up in departmental budgets, consulting fees, software licenses, travel costs that seemed excessive. When I asked about them, Marcus always had explanations that sounded reasonable, but something about his delivery felt rehearsed. Then there were the meetings. Marcus started having lunches and coffee with people from competing firms. He said he was networking, staying current with industry trends, building relationships that could lead to future opportunities. Again, perfectly reasonable. But why hadn't he mentioned these meetings beforehand? Why did I only find out about them from other people? A vendor who mentioned seeing Marcus at lunch with someone from Precision Components, one of our competitors, or Helen noting a lunch expense at a restaurant near the offices of another rival firm. In September of 2013, I hired a private investigator. I'm not proud of this, but I needed to know if I was imagining things or if there was real cause for concern. I told myself I was protecting 247 employees, protecting the legacy I'd built, protecting my grandson's inheritance. The investigator's name was Raymond Silva, a former FBI agent who specialized in corporate investigations. I met him in a diner 40 miles from our offices, paid him in cash, told him I needed to know what Marcus Webb was really doing. 3 weeks later, Raymond came back with a preliminary report. Marcus had been meeting regularly with venture capitalists. He'd incorporated a new company in Delaware called Apex Precision Manufacturing. He'd been having detailed conversations with several of our key employees, particularly our lead engineers and production managers. And he'd been compiling extensive data about our operations, client lists, pricing structures, supplier relationships, employee capabilities. He's planning something, Raymond said, sliding a folder across the table. Whether it's starting his own competing business or setting himself up to be acquired by a larger competitor, I can't say for certain yet. But he's definitely working an angle. I felt my hands start to shake. Not from fear, but from rage. Pure, cold rage. Keep digging, I said. I want to know everything. Every meeting, every email if you can get them, every phone call. I want to know who he's working with and what exactly he's planning. That might require some ethically gray methods, Raymond said carefully. I didn't build this company by being naive about how the world works, I replied. Get me the information. I went home that night and sat in my study, in the same leather chair I'd sat in the night Martha died, the night I got the call about Michael's accident. I poured myself 3 fingers of scotch and stared at the photographs on my wall. Pictures of the first shop, just me and 2 employees in a building barely larger than a garage. Pictures of our first major contract celebration. Pictures of the ribbon cutting when we opened our current facility. Pictures of Michael at various ages, including one from his college graduation where he stood next to me, both of us grinning, his whole future ahead of him. What would Michael think of how I'd handled this? Would he be disappointed that I'd been so trusting, so easily deceived? Or would he understand that sometimes you have to believe in people, have to take risks on them, even if it means getting burned? I called James that night. It was late, nearly 11, but he answered on the second ring. Grandpa? Everything okay? Do you remember what you said about Marcus? At Christmas, a couple years back? There was a long pause. I remember. Tell me what you saw. What your instincts said. Another pause, longer this time. I saw someone who wanted something from you. Not someone who wanted to learn from you or be part of something you built. Someone who saw you as a stepping stone. Why didn't you push harder? Tell me directly? Would you have listened? James's voice was gentle, not accusatory. You were so excited about having found someone. Someone to bridge the gap until I was ready, you said. I didn't want to be the grandson who seemed jealous or insecure. I figured either I was wrong and Marcus would prove himself, or you'd figure it out on your own. I should have listened to you. What's happened? I told him everything. The meetings, the new company, the data compilation, all of it. James listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? He asked. I don't know yet. But whatever it is, it's going to be permanent. He's not just going to walk away from this, James. He's going to remember why you don't betray a Thornfield. Grandpa. Don't worry. Nothing illegal. Nothing that crosses lines that can't be uncrossed. But he's going to learn that 40 years of building relationships and reputation can't be stolen with some smooth talking and corporate espionage. I'm coming home, James said. This weekend. We'll figure this out together. Over the next 3 months, Raymond compiled a dossier that was both infuriating and illuminating. Marcus had been planning his betrayal for at least 18 months, possibly longer. He'd identified our 20 largest clients and created detailed profiles on each one: key decision makers, contract renewal dates, pain points, opportunities for undercutting our pricing. He'd recruited 4 of our best people, 2 engineers, a production manager, and incredibly, Helen Chen, our CFO. That last one hurt. Helen had been with me for 15 years. I trusted her completely, given her access to everything. And she'd been feeding Marcus information about our financial position, our cash flow, our profit margins on each contract. The plan, as far as Raymond could piece together, was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus would launch Apex Precision Manufacturing with initial funding from a venture capital firm out of Boston. He'd poach our key employees, offering them 20% raises and equity stakes. Then he'd systematically approach our major clients, undercutting our pricing by just enough to make switching attractive, using the inside information he'd gathered to know exactly where we were vulnerable. The timeline was aggressive. He was planning to launch in 6 months, in March of 2014. He'd already secured a manufacturing facility, ironically, one I'd considered buying years ago but passed on. He'd lined up suppliers, many of the same ones we used, by promising them larger volumes. He'd even started preliminary conversations with our major clients, planting seeds of doubt about Thornfield Manufacturing's future, suggesting that with my age and no clear succession plan, they should consider diversifying their supplier base. It was comprehensive. It was ruthless. And if I didn't act, it would work. James came home for Thanksgiving that year, and we spent an entire weekend going through everything in my study. He'd graduated by then and was working for an engineering firm in Chicago, but he took time off to help me think through the situation. "You could sue him," James said, studying the documents Raymond had compiled. "Non-compete agreements, corporate espionage, breach of fiduciary duty. You'd probably win. Lawsuits take years and cost fortunes. And they're public. Our clients would hear about internal discord and it might spook them anyway. Plus, it would tie up my time and energy in courtrooms instead of running the business. So what then?" I leaned back in my chair, thought about everything I'd learned over 4 decades in business. Marcus thinks he's been clever. He thinks he's learned how to run this business by watching me. But what he doesn't understand is that relationships aren't just transactions. They're built on history, on trust that's been earned over time. He has information, but he doesn't have what I have. Which is? The goodwill of 23 years with Jerry Mullins. 30 years with our steel suppliers. 15 years with most of our major clients. He can undercut pricing all he wants, but can he match the trust we've built? Can he promise them that when there's a problem, he'll fly across the country to fix it personally, the way I have? Can he guarantee that their orders will ship on time, every time, because I have relationships with backup suppliers who'll prioritize us in a pinch? James smiled slowly. "So you're going to beat him at his own game?" "Not exactly. I'm going to change the game entirely." In December of 2013, I called an all-hands meeting at Thornfield Manufacturing. Every employee, from the floor workers to the management team, gathered in our main production area. I stood on a forklift platform so everyone could see me, and I spoke from the heart. "I'm 71 years old," I began. "I've been running this company for 32 years, and before that I worked in manufacturing for another 8. I've spent my entire adult life building something I could be proud of, something that provides good jobs for good people, something that delivers quality products to our clients." I paused, looked around at all the faces watching me. I saw confusion, concern, curiosity. But I'm not going to live forever. And I've been thinking a lot lately about what happens to this company when I'm gone. So I want to tell you about some changes we're going to be making. I outlined a new structure. We would transition to an employee stock ownership plan, an ESOP. Over the next 5 years, I would gradually sell my shares to the company, which would be held in trust for the employees. Everyone would own a piece of Thornfield Manufacturing. Everyone would share in the profits. Everyone would have a voice in major decisions. The room was silent when I finished. Then someone in the back started clapping, and within seconds, the entire facility erupted in applause. I held up my hand for quiet. There's more. We're also going to be implementing a new bonus structure tied to performance and longevity. The longer you've been here, the more you benefit. We're raising starting wages by 10% across the board. And we're enhancing our benefits package, better health insurance, a real retirement plan, profit sharing. More applause, louder this time. This company has been good to me, I said. Now it's time to make sure it's even better to all of you. I saw Marcus in the crowd, his face carefully neutral, but I caught the flash of calculation in his eyes. He was doing the math, realizing what this meant for his plans. Those employees he'd been planning to poach? They'd now be walking away from equity stakes, from ownership in a company they'd helped build. The value proposition had just shifted dramatically. After the meeting, I called Marcus into my office. Interesting announcement, he said, sitting across from my desk. Bold move. I should have done it years ago. I've been thinking too much about legacy, about family succession. But the real legacy is ensuring this company survives and thrives, that it takes care of the people who've made it successful. What about James? I thought the plan was to eventually transition the company to him. James will be taken care of. And if he wants to be involved in the business, there will be opportunities. But this way, the company isn't dependent on family bloodlines. It's built on merit and dedication. Marcus nodded slowly. It's going to make recruiting difficult for competitors. Who'd want to leave a company where they're building equity? Exactly. I looked him directly in the eye. It's also going to make it very difficult for anyone thinking about starting a competing business. Hard to convince people to jump ship when the ship they're on is sailing toward prosperity. Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or respect, or fear. He recovered quickly. Well, it's a smart move. Congratulations, Bob. This is going to secure Thornfield's future. That's the plan. But the ESOP was just the beginning. I spent the next month personally visiting every major client. I flew to Detroit to have dinner with Jerry Mullins. I drove to Cleveland to meet with the purchasing director at Midwest Automotive. I went to St. Louis, to Nashville, to Pittsburgh. And in every meeting, I had the same conversation. I want to talk to you about the future of our partnership. I'd say, I'm getting older, and I know that creates uncertainty. So I want you to meet someone. That someone was James. My grandson had agreed to leave his job in Chicago and come work at Thornfield Manufacturing. We created a new position for him, Vice President of Strategic Development. His job was to modernize our operations, to bring in new technologies and processes, to ensure we remained competitive for the next generation. But more than that, his job was to be the face of Thornfield's future. To show our clients that there was continuity, that there was someone young and capable and committed who would be there for the next 30 years of their relationship with us. James was brilliant in these meetings. He'd studied engineering, understood the technical aspects of what we did, but he also had my gift for relationships. He listened, asked smart questions, understood their concerns. By the end of each meeting, our clients weren't just reassured, they were excited about the future. In February, I made another move. I approached 3 of our largest clients with the proposition, strategic partnerships. Rather than just being a supplier, we'd work together on joint development projects. They'd get input into our R&D priorities, ensuring we were developing the components they needed for their future vehicle platforms. We'd get longer-term contracts with guaranteed volumes, providing stability and allowing us to make larger investments in equipment and capabilities. 2 of them agreed immediately. The third wanted to think about it but was clearly interested. These partnerships would have been impossible for a startup like Marcus's Apex to compete with. You can't undercut pricing when your competitor is embedded in the client's long-term product development roadmap. Meanwhile, Raymond Silva was still working his magic. In March, he delivered his masterpiece, a complete copy of Marcus's business plan for Apex Precision Manufacturing. How he got it, I didn't ask. But reading through it was both satisfying and infuriating. Every assumption Marcus had made about Thornfield's vulnerabilities was now outdated. He was planning to attack a version of our company that no longer existed. His financial projections were based on being able to poach key employees, but those employees now had equity stakes they'd be abandoning. His pricing strategy assumed we'd be locked into outdated cost structures, but we'd renegotiated with suppliers and implemented efficiency improvements that cut our costs by 12%. His client targeting was based on uncertainty about succession, but James's presence had eliminated that concern. I called a meeting with Marcus in late March. It was time to end this. "Marcus, we need to have a difficult conversation." He sat down, his expression wary. "What's on your mind, Bob?" I slid a folder across the desk. "That's a copy of the business plan for Apex Precision Manufacturing." "Your business plan?" The color drained from his face. "I know about the meetings with venture capitalists. I know about the employee recruitment efforts. I know about the facility you've leased, the suppliers you've lined up, the clients you've been courting. I know everything, Marcus." To his credit, he didn't try to deny it. "How long have you known?" "Long enough. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Are you going to sue me?" I considered it. But lawsuits are messy and public, and they'd hurt both of us. So here's what's going to happen instead. You're going to resign from Thornfield, effective immediately. You're going to shut down Apex Precision Manufacturing. You're going to return all proprietary information you've taken from this company. And you're going to do all of this quietly. And if I don't? I opened a second folder. Then I released this information to everyone. The venture capitalists will pull their funding. They don't invest in people who steal from their former employers. The employees you've been recruiting will distance themselves. No one wants to be associated with corporate espionage. The clients you've been courting will blacklist you. They have long-standing relationships with me and they'll see you as untrustworthy. The suppliers will refuse to work with you. Many of them have been with me for decades and they won't betray that for a startup founded on betrayal. You'll be radioactive in this industry, Marcus. Unhireable. Unfundable. Done. His hands were shaking. You've destroyed everything. No. You destroyed everything when you decided to betray someone who gave you a chance, who trusted you, who tried to build you up. I'm just making sure you face consequences for that choice. What about Helen? The others who were going to join me? Helen resigned yesterday. She'll land on her feet somewhere else, but not in this industry. I've made sure of that. The others are staying at Thornfield, where they have equity stakes and a future. Turns out when you give people real ownership and treat them with respect, they're not so eager to jump ship. Marcus stood up, his face pale. I underestimated you. Yes, you did. You saw an old man and assumed that meant weak, meant past his prime, meant easy to manipulate. But I'd been playing this game since before you were born, Marcus. And the most important lesson I've learned is that in business, reputation is everything. You can have all the intelligence and ambition in the world, but if you don't have integrity, you have nothing. He walked to the door, then turned back. For what it's worth, I did learn a lot from you. The operations improvements, the strategic thinking, that was all real. It wasn't all manipulation. That makes it worse, not better. You had the ability to build something real, something legitimate. Instead you chose the shortcut, the betrayal. That's not just bad business, Marcus. That's a character flaw. After he left, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window at the production floor where men and women were busy making the components that kept American cars running. I felt tired, older than my 71 years. But I also felt something else, satisfaction. Not the petty satisfaction of having defeated an enemy, but the deeper satisfaction of having protected something worth protecting. The next few months were busy. We finalized the ESOP transition. James officially moved back and took on an expanded role, working side by side with me to modernize operations while maintaining the relationship-focused culture that had always been our strength. The strategic partnerships with our major clients solidified, leading to 2 new long-term contracts that secured work for the next 5 years. In June, I got a call from Jerry Mullins. "Bob, I heard about what happened with Marcus. I wanted you to know that I appreciate how you handled it. No drama, no lawsuits, just took care of business quietly. That's class. He was a lesson I needed to learn, Jerry. About trusting my instincts and not being so eager to find easy answers to hard questions." "Well, you came out stronger. Great Lakes is committing to doubling our order volume over the next 3 years. We want to deepen the partnership, not diversify away from it." After I hung up, I allowed myself a small smile. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's succeeding so thoroughly that your enemy's plans become irrelevant. I also heard through the grapevine what happened to Marcus. He tried to salvage Apex, but without funding and without the employees he'd been counting on, it collapsed before it ever really launched. He ended up taking a job at a mid-sized manufacturing firm in Ohio, several steps down from where he'd been at Thornfield. Last I heard, he was managing a single production line, reporting to someone 10 years younger than him. I didn't take pleasure in his downfall, exactly. But I didn't lose any sleep over it either. Helen Chin was trickier. Part of me wanted to ensure she never worked in the industry again, but that felt petty and excessive. She'd been a good CFO for many years before Marcus turned her head with promises of equity and opportunity. So I let it be known through industry channels that she'd left Thornfield for personal reasons, nothing more. She found work at a smaller company, took a pay cut, but landed on her feet. Sometimes that's enough. One evening in August, James and I were working late in my office, going over plans for a new product line. Around 9 o'clock, we decided to call it a night and walked out to the parking lot together. "Grandpa," James said as we reached our cars, "can I ask you something?" "Always." "When did you first know?" "About Marcus, I mean. When did you first suspect something was wrong?" I thought about it, reaching back through the memories. "You know, I think part of me knew from the very beginning. From that first night in Chicago when he approached me in the bar. There was something too smooth about him, too calculated. But I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe I'd found someone who could help secure the company's future, someone who could bridge the gap until you were ready. I wanted it badly enough that I ignored my instincts. That's not like you." "No, it isn't. After your grandmother died, and then your father, I think I was. Vulnerable isn't quite the right word. But I was looking for something. Someone to pass the torch to, someone to make me feel like all the work had been worth it, that it would continue after I was gone. Marcus saw that vulnerability and exploited it. But you caught him in time. Barely. If I'd waited another 6 months, he might have pulled it off. The damage would have been severe, maybe catastrophic." James was quiet for a moment. "What made you finally start investigating?" "You did, actually. That Christmas when you said you saw him as someone who wanted something from me rather than someone who wanted to be part of what we were building. That comment stuck with me, nagged at me. Eventually I couldn't ignore it anymore. I'm glad you listened." "So am I." I put my hand on his shoulder. "You know what the real revenge is, James? It's not that Marcus failed. It's that we succeeded. It's that the company is stronger now than it was before he tried to destroy it. It's that the employees have real ownership. It's that you're here, learning the business, ready to lead it into the future. That's the revenge. Proving that integrity and relationships and treating people right will always beat out manipulation and betrayal." James smiled. "That's a very grandfather thing to say." "Well, I am your grandfather. Comes with the territory." We said goodnight and I drove home, taking the long way through town, past the old buildings and new developments, past the restaurant where I'd had my first date with Martha 53 years ago, past the park where Michael used to play as a boy. I thought about legacy, about what we leave behind, about the difference between building something that lasts and building something that's just meant to enrich yourself. When I got home, I poured myself a drink and sat in my study, looking at those same photographs that had witnessed so many moments of triumph and tragedy. I thought about adding a new one, maybe a picture from the ESOP announcement, or one of James and me together on the production floor. But then I decided against it. The past was the past. What mattered now was the future. I'm 76 now, officially semi-retired. I come into the office 3 days a week, mostly to consult on major decisions and maintain relationships with our longest-standing clients. James is CEO, and he's brilliant at it, better than I ever was in some ways. He's more systematic, more willing to embrace new technologies, more comfortable with the complexities of modern business. Thornfield Manufacturing employs 312 people now. The ESOP has been a tremendous success. Productivity is up, turnover is down, and the company culture is stronger than ever. We've expanded into new product lines, won contracts with 2 additional major automotive manufacturers, and just opened a second facility in Tennessee. Last month, we celebrated our 43rd anniversary as a company. There was a big party, barbecue and speeches and awards for long-term employees. I was asked to say a few words, and I kept it short. 43 years ago, I started this company in a building not much bigger than my garage. I had a dream of building something that would last, that would provide good jobs, that would create value for customers and employees alike. But I couldn't have done any of this alone. Every person here has contributed to this success. You are Thornfield Manufacturing. You are the reason we've survived and thrived. And as long as we stick together, as long as we treat each other and our customers with integrity and respect, there's no limit to what we can achieve. There was applause, and then James took the microphone and talked about the future, about new innovations and opportunities. I stood at the back of the room, watching, feeling proud and grateful and at peace. Someone asked me recently if I still thought about Marcus, about what he tried to do. The truth is, I rarely do. He's a footnote in the company's history, a cautionary tale about the dangers of betrayal and shortcuts. The chapter of the story that matters is what came after, the strengthening of our culture, the deepening of our relationships, the building of something that will outlast me by decades. That's real revenge, I've come to believe. Not hurting the person who hurt you, but taking what they tried to break and making it stronger, better, more resilient. Not dwelling on the betrayal but focusing on the building, the creating, the improving. Every Tuesday evening, I have dinner with James and his wife Emma. Sometimes we talk about business, but mostly we talk about life, their plans to start a family, the book Emma is writing, the trip to Italy they're planning for next summer. These dinners remind me of the ones I used to have with Sarah and James when he was young, after Michael died. Life goes in cycles, patterns repeating and evolving. At one of these dinners, a few months ago, Emma asked me what I was most proud of in my life. I thought about it for a long time before answering. I'm proud that I built something that lasts, I finally said. Not just a company, but a community. 312 families depend on what we built. Thousands of cars drive safely every day because of components we manufacture. And when I'm gone, it will continue, not because of me, but because of the culture and values and relationships that outlast any individual. That's beautiful, Grandpa, James said. There's more. I'm proud that when I was tested, when someone I trusted tried to destroy what I'd built, I responded with integrity. I could have gotten vicious, could have crushed Marcus publicly, could have made him a pariah in ways that would have been deeply satisfying in the moment. But I chose a different path. I protected what